So as we know, the COVID lockdown has hit us hard as normal human beings in a small empty town called Portaferry, with students not being able to go to school and the economy rate dramatically dropping down. But how were families most affected by the lockdown? I decided to talk to my own family, talking about what their experience with us was like during the lockdown. Here is what I got from them. How did the COVID-19 lockdown impact your life?
Well, it was a worrying time. I remember away back in March 2020 or thereabouts, hearing about it on the news and hearing about that it's this thing that's quite far away from us. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, hopefully that's something that won't ever make its way to us and won't ever come our way. But gradually, as time went on, it became more and more obvious that this was not going away. This was something that was going to come our way. I remember people talking about brown face masks and things in other countries and thinking, oh, like, that's not going to happen to us. We're never going to have to wear face coverings or alcohol gel and sanitising and all that kind of stuff. It'll all be sorted before that gets to us, but it wasn't. And with every sort of day and week and month that passed, it became more and more obvious that this was not going to go anywhere. And then whenever the announcements came onto the news about lockdown, that you weren't going to be able to work, in the office, you had to work from home. Children weren't going to be able to go to school any longer. It was all homeschooling. It was very serious and worrying. And I remember thinking to myself, if somebody gets this, they could be very seriously ill. They could be hospitalised. They could die. Anybody with underlying health conditions, people, elderly people. This is serious. It isn't just something that's in a faraway place that something might get solved or fixed in time. This is real and this is now, and every day more and more people were taken ill, more and more people were dying from it. And the news was just every day. It was almost like back in the day in the Troubles time when you would have heard a bomb went off here and another bomb went off there and somebody killed somebody. And it became the norm, unfortunately. That was the norm back in Troubles times. When on the news, you turned on the news, somebody was bombed somewhere, somebody was shot somewhere. And unfortunately, as I was growing up, I was born in the 80s and then in the 1980, but in the 90s, that's all you heard on the news. And it became sort of something that happened all the time, and it was just the norm. It shouldn't have been the norm. It was a horrible norm, but it was something that you just got used to hearing.
How did the COVID-19 lockdown impact your life?
I must say the COVID lockdown didn't really affect my life too much because I found it actually quite similar to before, whereas I would normally be doing a lot of stuff around home and outside and doing my different wee jobs about the place. Most of the jobs I was doing was outside because I'm a joiner. So I was out and about, not really indoors. I kept most of my jobs outdoors. But one thing I can remember about the lockdown that first year, around March, April, I had started to build my garage outside here, and it kept me busy. I remember listening to it on the radio in the mornings, talking about this new virus taking over, and I remember thinking, my God, this is terrible. But I just kept my head down and got on with things, and so I mean, I must say I didn't find it had made much of an impact. My life, or my family's, my wife was working from home. Kids were at home, yes, part of the time they were at home. I just carried on. I didn't have to, because their mum was here, I was able to, actually nearly had freed me up a little bit more, probably than before, but yeah, so it didn't impact me too much at all, to be honest.
After asking both of my parents on what they had to say, I also got one of my sisters to give her views on what the lockdown was like. Here is what she had to say. So Zoe, what were you feeling during the lockdown?
Really isolated. It was hard to communicate with the family, just being all in one tight space the whole entire time. Everyone was struggling at the same time, and it was just hard you didn't actually know how you were feeling yourself. It didn't feel like real life, To be honest, it just didn't feel real.
And how did lockdown affect your education?
It was really hard. Because of online learning, everyone was confused and just so messed up in their mind. They didn't actually know what they were doing. You weren't getting taught properly, which was the hard part, and everyone was still struggling, and they had to get their mindset back before school started again.
My mom, who is the only employed worker in our family, also talked about how she was working throughout the lockdown and how stressful it was for her even working from home. So, how stressful was it working from home and not being able to work from your main office?
Well, it had its advantages as well as disadvantages, and I'll start with those. The advantages first. Not having to drive every day to work meant that you had more time to get yourself ready in the morning, but also to devote to actual work. So very often I'd have been trying to get to work to be there for 9 o'clock, and travelling through lots of traffic, lots of traffic jams, and all the normal chaos that comes with congestion and cities and travelling and transport. And not having to do that meant that I was less stressed on the journey to and from work, less expense of fuel costs, but also less time taken in a car, which I found wasted time, empty time that you couldn't utilise. You couldn't check your emails, you couldn't send an email, you're driving, so that time is wasted. You can phone somebody on hands free, but really you shouldn't be doing that, because you can't devote yourself fully to your work if you're driving along the car. You have to concentrate on the road, and it really is dead time on the road travelling to and from work. So the advantage of not having to drive was I could have more time actually applying myself to work, and less stress, less fuel costs, and less global environmental impact of people putting fumes out into the air. And also being able to be at home for a lunch break and a tea break, to be around my family who were also at home because of the COVID lockdown. Children were off school, they were being homeschooled, meant that we had more time socially as a family, which was also a bonus. That was the positive side of it. The negative side of it was that your house became your workplace, so you couldn't escape work. And I set up an office in my living room, beautiful view looking out into the green fields in front of me here, lovely. But my living room was no longer my living room, it was now my office. So every time I came into my living room, I was reminded of the work I had to do or tasks that I needed to finish off. It became that your workplace, your home became blurred, that it wasn't home leisure space, it was actually work. And that's not really good for you, because what you tend to do then is you think, oh, I'll just finish that off now outside of work hours, and you're working when you really should be resting.
And my dad, who is actually an unemployed worker, shared his views on what it was like looking after us when we were doing online classes from home. What did your experience feel like with us when we were working online?
I didn't. I hardly seen you. The difference was I hardly seen you because you were down the rooms, each on your iPads or computers, laptops. Mum was on her computer here, laptop in the living room. So you were all down the rooms. So my experience of that would be that I hardly seen you at all. Yes, you used to come out for lunch and for dinner. I carried on the normal duties around the house. But as regards you working online, it didn't really affect me in any way too much at all. It just, you were here, but hardly seen you. It was like as if you were away, because you were down each of your bedrooms and that, and you were mostly working from the bedrooms. Whereas the kitchen was free, I was able to go about and do any different tasks around the house, like cooking and organising things like that, ironing, and all was able to do that down the kitchen. But as regards having, it didn't seem to bother me in any way at all, really. So yeah.
While I learned how my own family were feeling during lockdown, and I also learned that it was not only me who was feeling so alone inside, as my whole family were the same.
At first I didn't think about it. At first I thought whatever.
So there we have it. My mum says that the lockdown was mostly worrying for her, and that there was a few advantages and disadvantages on working from home. And my dad says that the lockdown for him was not as bad for him as he was working on his new garage. And my little sister, who was in primary school at the time, says that the lockdown affected her education a lot as she felt very isolated, and it was hard to get a full mindset before getting back to school. So the result we got from this is that my family really were affected by the lockdown. And who knows what could happen next? Could we have another lockdown? Or could there be a next pandemic? And now that the vaccines are in, I'm sure everything can be back to normal. Bye for now.